Hello, everybody. This is the Everybody Hates Cleveland the podcast, episode 60, I believe. I'm Mike Hattery, your venerable host. I'm here today with Jeff Ellis from Scout.com, but really all over the place. He's published quite a bit at Scout. He's even guest published at Everybody Hates Cleveland. I know him back from our IBI days, though he's still involved at IBI at times. But he's really sort of been invested in scouting, particularly covering the MLB draft at a high level over the last couple of years. So I'm happy to have him on. Always love to talk to Jeff. And today we're sort of going to run down our top 20s and sort of the differences that we see. And mostly it's the similarity that we see in the top end talent in the Indian system. So welcome aboard, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this. I know others have been as well. This should be a fun talk for a deep minors.
Yeah, so this was the really challenging thing. I think this is the first time in 5 or 6 years that I found sort of cutting it off at 20 guys was a challenge. Because I think there are 3 or 4 guys for me that I looked at when I was looking at 20 that were really solid prospects. Was it sort of similar for you?
Yeah, it's one of those things, you look at the list, and I mean, mine changed a bit throughout, but I think like the initial 15, I kind of thought would make it. All of those guys are there, and it's just moving people around, figuring out the exact location and place of guys. But, it's as I was looking over it today, or last night even as we talked, it was interesting to see that we agreed on 17 guys. And of the three differences, like I know number 21 for me would have been one of the guys on your list. So, I mean, and I think you said year 21 was someone on my list. So, it's even, you could say like we agree on 18 of the, or what? Yeah, 18 of the first 21 guys. It's a high level of agreement, which was interesting.
So, I want to talk about, I guess, a couple of interesting guys who I left off before we dig in. And I want to ask you about them. One of the interesting guys I noticed that neither of us included is Willie Castro, who's a shortstop middle infielder, very young for his level, playing in Lake County. Did you give any thought to sort of including him, or was he, substantively outside for you?
Yeah, I considered him. When I looked up the numbers, I know there's also some, he's a good defender, and he is young, but it's not the well below 700 OPS at the level. I think the strikeouts and walks weren't where I wanted it. That either. I just had too many concerns to really consider slotting him in the that area. I mean, he's probably closer to 30 for me, which I know a lot of people won't agree with. But I mean, at points, I wonder if it's more what he could do and less what he has done. He is 19. He is in Lake County, but he's having his best season ever, and it's still just an okay season. There's a lot of issues offensively for me there.
All right, so what I'm going to do is I want to talk about, we'll just sort of, first I want to note that with this podcast, there's a list that's being published that shows both of our top 20s, Jeff's first, mine second. That'll be with the post that includes this podcast. So if you sort of want to reference it when you're listening, that'll be easily accessible for you. So I want to talk about our 20 through 16s. One guy, so why don't you just talk about, let's talk about 20 through 18. Let's break it into three. Is there anybody, and we can sort of look at each other's lists. I guess question for me is, Sam Hentges is a guy who's really popped for both of us, and I don't think he gets a lot of prospect coverage. You want to talk about why Sam Hentges sort of climbed to 19 for you?
I think I even had him higher on my first list. Just if you look at him from a physical perspective, it's hard not to love a 6'6", 250-pound left-hander. It's a kid from Minnesota. You don't see a lot of prospects from the Minnesota high school ranks. So he's going to be a little bit slower in development. And I mean, that should be expected. But at the same time, while saying that, he's 19 in Lake County, which I believe is And we were just talking about the upside of a Willie Castro. I believe he's also 19 in Lake County. I think it's about 2 to 3 years younger in the age level. And for me, it's just the strikeout rate down there. The walk rate is also high, giving up home runs at a decent clip. He's giving up hits at a decent clip. So for me, I see a huge left-hander with velocity, who I know the Indians like because they gave him a big bonus, who is showing strikeout stuff. I look at that and I see a good chance for, worst case, a reliever, but very good chance for him.
Yeah, I just falling in love with, you pick different things at levels that become important indicators to you, and first you fall in love with how projectable his frame is. He's already added a little velocity while he's been in the system, and he's getting all that swing and miss. I mean, the K rate has been absolutely phenomenal. You sort of bet on a guy who's doing that to sort of eventually curb his walk rate, especially when he's 19 and playing against right now, a bunch of guys who were drafted out of college, and sort of players much older than his age. I think that's something that he's really projectable. And I think I wanted to talk about Hentges because I think it really speaks to sort of the depth of this system. And I think when we get to Ben Heller, it does too. But it's not long ago that I remember having conversations about guys like Matt Langwell and CC Lee as top 10 prospects, as guys in the 8 to 11 range. People were ranking them there consistently. And if you look at those guys, I'd rather have Ben Heller or Sam Hentges than either of those prospects as sort of assets. I think the point is we're talking about the back end of the top 20 and not the back end of the top 10 with these guys, which sort of speaks to system depth.
Definitely. It's the years of the Chunju Chans. And if you go back to like 2008, the year they made after they made the playoffs, and you look at Baseball America's top 10, Jensen Lewis as a reliever was about 6th on that list. Masa Kobayashi, who was 34 and signed out of Japan, and made the top 10. That's how ugly the system once was. I think Chuck Lofgren was the number 2, who was a perfectly nice lefty. But if you look at what Chuck Lofgren did in the minors, and you look at this list now, he wouldn't make the top 10 of this list. It's definitely a big change. It's nice to see. And what I like about both of us with Sam Hentges is we're looking at projectability here, and neither of us mentioned, anyone who's listening to this is probably screaming, what about his ERA? And while that's an issue, it's A-ball. We're looking for specific things at this point, and we're not, ERA does not matter unless it's something redonkulously low that is going to get our attention to be like, how is he doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to move. I think you've written up Logan Ice, and he's someone that people should sort of read about. But I don't necessarily want to talk about Logan Ice yet until he gets a little more sample size. A lot of projectability there, and you think he can be a long-term, at least backup catcher, which is phenomenal at value at number 20. One of the interesting guys that I had him at 14, you had him at 18. I think Greg Allen is a guy who's sort of very interesting in this system. Tons, he's posted sort of elite production, but he's a little old for his level, which is concerning. And he doesn't have a lot of power, but he's a great athlete, steals a lot of bases, and has phenomenal plate discipline. Why isn't he in Akron yet? Other than, I guess we have this clog with Poppy, but he's a much higher priority prospect to me than Poppy. Is he higher for you?
Oh yeah, he's definitely higher for me, but I don't think he's higher for the Indians. Poppy was a first-round pick. Allen was 5th or 6th. I think Poppy is still a guy that they believe in more, and I think that shows by the fact that Greg Allen is still a level down. But I wish almost I could put him higher. Like he was higher in some drafts, but then I just had to kind of take a step back. I mean, my comp on him has been kind of a poor man's Michael Bourne, when Michael Bourne was an excellent player. Just if you look at the high walk rate with the defensive ability, he's one of those guys that I think we considered a fringe prospect because of his age and level, but just really good on-base skills along with the ability to play 3 outfield spots. For me, it's a feeling that hopefully, I haven't talked to anyone who right now jumped to the top doesn't think that Clint Frazier is near and ready to move up. We've been talking to scouts this stuff. So I think, we could see in the next month just a whole shift of outfielders going up. I think we will see Allen and Akron this year.
Yeah, and I think rightfully he's ranked sort of. You and I have gone sort of risk averse because of his age at that level, but I think it's really easy to see he goes up to Akron in the next couple of weeks and post 2 months very similar to what we're seeing in Lynchburg. And all of a sudden, I think it would be much easier for you and I to sort of stomach a 10 or 11 placement with Allen than he is now. And I think that's pretty likely. So let's talk about Mr. Ben Heller. And, he just snuck out of my list, mostly just because I wanted to make a list that didn't include a single reliever as of now. Just because I really love the position players and starting pitching. But, he's a phenomenal sort of bullpen prospect as bullpen prospects go. How soon do we see Ben Heller in Cleveland, and what's his upside? Is he an eighth inning guy?
I think he's a ninth inning guy. I really do that, and I think we could see him as early as this year. The way they have promoted him as aggressively as they have, I think they're viewing him as a guy who can help and help quickly. He's already 24. He'll be 25 in August, so he's not a young man for the minors. 25 is very young anywhere else but minor league baseball. But for this, when you look at it, he did not spend much time in Akron. Got 20 games in Akron. He's now up to AAA. So it's just one of those things. You look at him. For me, I see a guy who, even with the promotion to AAA, is still has a walk rate barely over 3, which would be compared to a Sean Armstrong, who last I looked was a 6.7. Now he doesn't have Armstrong's strikeout rate at the level. He's only about 9, but traditionally he's been closer to 12. And the fact that he hits 101 on a radar gun, I think all of these things set him up as a back end arm. And I think, in all honesty, I think he has. If you had the Indians in a candid mode, they would tell you he's their top relief prospect right now.
So how soon can we sort of bet on Heller assuming a role? He's 24. He's a relatively finished product, as you discussed. How can we bet on him sort of pitching high leverage innings at the end of the season or likely next?
I think he has a chance to come up when rosters expand. That's going to come down to I have to look at the only thing holding back Ben Heller to me right now is a 40-man crunch. I'll be honest, I haven't looked to see who they have to protect for next year. Right now, there's about 3 or 4 easy dead weight guys. But just looking at things, they're almost in a situation where they have so much depth it's turned into a detriment, where they're going to have to look at guys and they're going to have talent that they might lose that is worthwhile players. So if anything keeps Heller back, it's the fact that I don't think he needs to be protected. He was drafted in 2013. This is just his 3rd year in the system, so he wouldn't be protected this offseason. But I also think if they are in the hunt, in the heat of things, and he is going to help them, they're not going to hesitate.
Yeah, I think it would be so easy, I think, sitting here to just say, how have we not cut Austin Adams for Heller? Mostly because I think of AAA more as a sort of holding cell than finishing school for people like Heller. And I think we've seen, Heller he's not Cody. I don't think he's quite Cody Allen, but he's very similar in track. He's sort of sprinting through the system. He has phenomenal stuff. And I think AAA is sort of just this like holding cell for him that hopefully won't last too long.
No, I agree with
Go
that.
ahead.
That seems about what I would say as well. He's not the Allen class, but he's a step down. I also agree AAA is more of a, hey, face as close as you can face to, face a bunch of guys who have played in the majors.
So I've included a couple of people in the back end of my top 20 to just sort of create a dispute, I suppose. Not really. I believe in them there. I've always, not always, but I included Anthony Santander, which is something that perhaps raised your eyebrow. In fact, I know it did. And I did it over a couple of guys, and I guess I care about I'm really passionate about a few things. First of all, Santander's a guy who I think has gotten this sort of, he's been around forever in the Indian system. And I think sometimes we forget how young players are when they've been around forever in the prospect conversation. He's actually relatively either at even age for the level or a tick young for his level, playing an A plus at Lynchburg. And the power's been really fantastic, as well as a walk rate that's sort of taken a significant improvement this year. So I just really buy into it. I've always thought he was fairly athletic for a corner, with some power. And to me, he's just really interesting tool set wise, and I think he's producing well for his age. Obviously, I think him and a couple of guys are sort of interchangeable. You can talk me into Ice instead of him at the back end of the top 20, or Heller, and it won't be a tough sell, but I think, to me, I wanted to include him because I think he's really taken a step forward this year in terms of how I view him as a prospect, which is why I included him.
I know I asked you about him, but it's one of those things. You do have a very good point. Just looking at numbers, he's walked more this season already than any season before, and he hit his 11th home run last night. Last night when I was looking, he was only at 10. So there's some interesting developments there. Switch hitters are always valuable.
So I need you to talk me down. I want you to throw water on my fire right now, Matt Esparza. That's my big, my Matt Esparza crush.
And you're not alone in that. Like, I've had a few people bring his name up. The interesting thing with Esparza, I think, just if you go back, is the fact that this guy in 3 years played at 3 different colleges. This is the first time he's had a consistent coaching approach in his entire career, and the K to walk rates last 2 years have been phenomenal. He's always been kind of old for his level. They haven't been super aggressive with him. I'm hoping he'll get a promotion soon. But I guess basically all you can throw on Matt Esparza at this point, because he's been so good, and he does have a background where it explains why he's a late developer. I mean, his strikeout rates are better his numbers are better than they were in college. So he's doing more than what anyone ever thought he'd do. You just look at him and say, well, he's not old for the level, but he's also Lake County is facing guys about his age, maybe a little younger. Some of the upside players, while he's a college guy, he's 6'2", so technically he's undersized. And I think small track record. And that's really all you can throw at him. The production is too good. You can't really knock him in any other way. I hope he gets promoted soon, because I want to, first off, we go to Lynchburg next, because he's in low A, right? So seeing him in Lynchburg would be important. Right now, if you look at just the track of things, I'd have to look at Lynchburg's rotation. But, I can tell you, looking at Akron, that's kind of a piecemeal rotation. It lacks a lot of, it's got Rob Kaminsky, who didn't make either of our lists, who has big name value, but it's kind of been decimated. So they just need to move Esparza up. He's dominated the level. And see if they do have something there.
I guess we can move to. I'm just so in love. To me, he's a little over average age, or I think basically average age for the level, and that K rate has sort of been off the charts. And determining how much of it is sort of pitchability advantage over younger hitters versus his stuff plays up because of a deceptive delivery is going to be really important. I think we'll begin to see how that plays at the next level. But I'm really excited for that with Esparza. So we have Eric Gonzalez called up yesterday. Everybody's getting all fired up. Everybody's really excited or angry or has a lot of hot takes about how it'll somehow inflate his value if he gets 10 plate appearances in the next week. But let's talk here. How Eric Gonzalez is 14. I'll admit that I didn't include him in my top 20. And this is not a knock on Eric Gonzalez. It's a great top 20, and I don't really see him as a regular. I see him as a util dude who plays like 80 games a season. What's your sort of take? His glove is fantastic at short, but the bat it's pretty empty.
Yeah, I mean, you look at his entire minor league numbers, and you look at even what it is. I mean, he strikes out at a decent clip as well. Doesn't walk much. It's going to be a low on base guy. He's got some speed, so there's the doubles potential. I've seen someone quote a tweet where they talk about how he's had so many extra base hits the past few years. Well, extra base hits are great. It's not a super indicator for the minors. Like, I've looked at them, and there's just a lot of bad fielding and bad scoring. So there's a lot of times doubles that shouldn't even be doubles get scored that way. So with him, you get that plus defense. You get a guy who can play 8 spots on the diamond. I think that's the more valuable. I think that's what's most valuable with him. Straight, when I look at him, I see a major leaguer. I have him on my list because at 14, Eric Gonzalez is a major league player. He's a safe major league player. Is he a starter? No. But I think he's a guy who can play 8 spots on the diamond, play at least half of those as a plus defender, provide speed off the bench. That is that perfect utility guy. I think he, especially with J-Ram kind of ascending to starter, they don't have a set utility guy who's the guy who's going to back up short. They need that. And with Gonzalez is out of options after this year, so they got to give him a shot, see what he can do. But I put him up there just because when I look at things, he is a no doubt major leaguer to me, and that's a top 15 prospect somewhere, even if it's a backup. We talked about a lot of guys in here already. Sam Hentges, who there's a chance he never sniffs the majors. I mean, we both like the potential, but we both agree with that as well. And Gonzalez is going to play, and I think he'll play as a long time as a backup. And there'll be maybe years where if you're a team that doesn't have a halfway decent shortstop, he could get starting time just because of the glove and how weak. While the top of the shortstop position is so good right now, there's still a lot of teams pulling out a lot of not so good options.
I think that's a good sale, and he makes enough contact that he's pretty interesting as a speed, contact, and defense guy at shortstop, playing 100 games. So that's certainly compelling, and I'm always down with his inclusion. It's also interesting because I don't think Gonzalez, in terms of how we view him as a prospect and his upside, has really declined at all in the last couple of years. And he's someone who 2 or 3 years ago we talked about as a top 5 prospect. Well, not top 5, but he was someone who was constantly discussed in the sort of 6 to 10 range. And now he's around 14, 15, and I think that's a really reasonable spot for his skill set. And I don't think his skill set changed a lot. I think the system just got deeper and sort of a lot of guys moved by him. Yu-Cheng Chang, really interesting to me. Young for his level, playing shortstop, crazy ISO, fantastic, over 200 ISO at shortstop, young for his level. The K rate's okay, the walk rate's improving. This guy's sort of popping, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I might be too low. Like, I'll be honest. Like, I have him at 15, and there's a place where you could convince him to put 13 where you put him. I could totally see put it because I sometimes play a little more safe on these, and I put him lower because he wasn't as safe as my next two. But I mean, everything you said is I just looked through the numbers. He's already set a new career high in walks, and there's still quite a few games to go, and just the power explosion. So it's more home runs than he's ever hit, more doubles than he's ever hit, while moving up a level. And I mean, let's be honest. Last year at Lake County, he was not impressive. It was an okay year, just because he was so young for the level. They still decided to move him up, and this year has been highly impressive. If someone put him in their top 10, I wouldn't argue it. I mean, he's probably going to move to third, but with what he's doing in Lynchburg, he's maybe the breakout minor league player this year to me. He's the guy who's kind of gone from who's not in my top 20 a year ago, who's just having a huge breakout in terms of production.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I have Chang at 13 and I have Bobby Bradley at 9, and I could talk myself into flipping those guys pretty easily without much of a challenge. Just in terms of, we're seeing power production from both, though Bradley more, but we're seeing much better PD from Chang, and we're seeing it at a much tougher and more valuable defensive position, even if he shifts to third. And I don't know, that Lynchburg team is just loaded and certainly a worthwhile watch. Uh, so one of the guys we absolutely agreed upon, we sat at 12, we took Will Benson there. You were sort of low on this pick and thought it was, largely covered because of the Nolan Jones pick coming later. Is how much of Benson being outside the top 10 in the Indian system is depth, and how much of it is they might have sort of not taken the best player available in the first round?
It's interesting because for years and years, we've heard how Texas is kind of this bastion of high upside drafting. And it's pretty clear the Indians should be on that list as well. If we're going to talk about teams with potential, it's the Indians. One of the interesting things about Benson is, we heard a lot of talk throughout the process. And, I talked about how much they love players who are young for their age, but it wasn't a deal breaker. Zimmer was kind of a little bit on the older side, but it seems that this is becoming a huge deal. And Benson being 17, they took him there. I mean, there's worlds of upside. He's a great kid. I've not heard one negative comment about him, and trust me, people love to tell you about the negatives. So if it was there, I'm sure I would have heard it. But that swing is an absolute disaster. And it doesn't matter how good the rest of the tools are. And he's not a great defender. I was talking to a guy in my simulation baseball league, Brian Hageman, and just want to give him credit because this isn't my comp and I don't want to steal someone else's. And he talked about Stephen Moya, and that might be right. Moya is a good athlete, but not a good defender. There's power potential, but low average. Both are kind of huge. That's what you're looking at with Benson. For all his athleticism, defense has been kind of iffy. But like I said, he's a great kid. You're just counting on basically taking his swing apart and rebuilding it. And that's why I'm outside the top 10. I mean, potential alone, if I had a list that was just top 10 players based on upside, would be one of the top 3 or 5, no more than 4 in the organization, just in terms of ceiling. But swing and defense are both pretty big things, and those are your sub-average, the skills that need the most work. That's why it's a 12.
This is one of the things that I enjoy most about your process. Is I think that you really balance risk more than I think other evaluators do. I think one of the things that becomes really easy when you're doing prospect coverage is to not want to miss on the guy with loads of upside. So you always stack those guys in the sort of 1 through 9 range or 1 through 5 and step away. And I think it's to me very responsible to be honest with the risk and sort of how that affects the ranking process in the expected value you receive from them. So I think that's outstanding. So we have a little bit of disagreement on Bobby Bradley, but I don't think we really do. He's someone who's a couple of players apart for us. We're both scared out of our minds of his K rate. It's sort of obfuscated a little bit by the fact that he's still very young for his level. He has a lot of power, but struggles against lefties. I mean, this is a guy who very boom or bust.
Yeah, I mean, I was very happy when I saw his placement on your list because I'm like, okay, so I'm not going to have to take the brunt of this, especially because this fan base wants, a 30 home run guy every year. It wants a guy with 40 home run potential. This fan base loves Bobby Bradley. I remember when I talked about trades this offseason and I involved Bobby Bradley because he's so far away. I took a lot of blowback on that. And I know he was a top 100 prospect in a lot of places because he put up some gaudy numbers. But For me, when I just kind of look at Bobby Bradley, the K rate is high, the contact skills have not been great, and yes, he's young for the age, young for the not young for his age, he's young for his level. Um, but is there really anything more than a power bat that is a plus skill? I mean, it's a plus plus scale. It's probably 70 grade power. But I'm not sure if there's anything else I look at with Bobby Bradley and think is even going to be a 5. And he's one of those guys I would put near the top of my list as a tradable prospect because he's still a big name right now. He does this again next year. He's not in any top 10. And like I said, he's a guy who might be a 4 bat, a 3 speed, a 3 defender with 7 power. I mean, that's great. That's Chris Carter. That's, you know, Pedro Alvarez. That's um, not a hugely valuable player. And these guys sometimes are more valuable in the low A level. And I don't look at him and see how you in any way think he's going to become a 6 hit at this
You stole my Pedro Alvarez comp. That's just
point.
really unfortunate for me. But I do think it's a fantastic comp for the following reason. I think we fall in love with power, and I think we forget that to be a productive first baseman, you have to have more than, the positional value is really low. Even if you're a good defender at first, there's very limited positional value. Your bat has to really carry you, and it can't be carried by sort of one aspect of your bat, which is power. You have to have power and have, a good on base skill like Santana, or you have to have power and a solid hit tool. But just sort of power as its own entity can't carry you, and the walk rate's increased, which is positive to me. I think that's been a really positive step. But until he shows some improvement in limiting that K rate while protecting his walk rate, I think his risk needs to be. We need to be much more honest with the incredibly volatile nature of Bradley, and I just don't see his swing does not seem destined. He's way too pole dominant to me. Seem destined to really improve his batting average by that much because he's really just going to be shifted at the big league level, which is even more concerning to me. But we've laid our Bobby Bradley criticism down, so we can move forward. Yandy Diaz, you ranked at 5. I ranked him at 10. A lot of hole in between. This is sort of he has a really high floor to you, correct? That's the bet on him at 5.
Yes, I think he is a league average third baseman in all honesty. And there's a value in that. And this organization, unless you want to look at Chen or Krieger, doesn't really have anyone else at third. And I was high on him last year. I would have to pull up my list. I might have had him like 4th. So it's a slight move down, but it's just he still is not striking out at all. He's now striking out more than he walks, but it's still very close numbers. He puts the ball in play. He's going to walk at a decent pace. Power still hasn't really come, but I'm fine with a high on base percentage guy who plays a solid third base. It's better than anything we've had in a long time at third base. Put him there, maybe you put him in like the 2 hole because he's not going to strike out. He can advance the base runner. And I'm good with that. For me, I think he is a future major league starter, and I really think he can, it's maybe 55 hit tool. His plate discipline is probably a 60, and his defense is about 55 by the reports I heard last year from what I saw. So above average defender, above average hit, plus plate discipline. I think that's a starter.
Most curious to me with Diaz, and my real apprehension with him, I think he is a really nice high floor guy in that I know he's a big league baseball player. What I don't know is whether I think he's a 2+ WAR player or a 1+ WAR player. Which is, do I think Yandy's like a really good bench bat who plays 100 games a year, has some positional versatility and adds value, or do I think he's a starter? And that's sort of where my gap. And I have apprehension because we don't see any power of note. It has spiked in Columbus, but it's still below league average ISO, and that's in a bandbox. And the second thing is the walk rate's curbed a little bit, and I think unless he adds a little power, and power is not essential, but it interacts with his other tools. And in that it interacts with his walk rate, I think he's someone who's going to just see a ton more strikes. I think he's someone who pitchers are going to go after a lot more at the big league level unless he adds a little power. So phenomenal plate discipline can get you really far, but it's hard to run, 12, 13, 14% walk rates with a 120 ISO. It's just something that's really hard to do, and he needs those sort of walk rates in his profile, I think, to be a starting third baseman. And so I'm not sure he can do that. I think he can, but I just want to sort of be honest about my apprehension with that, which is why I was a little lower on him, though I'm still very high on him as sort of an absolute lock to be a valuable major league piece.
He's just interesting because he's not a small guy. I interviewed him this year. I mean, he's a strong guy. He's big. He's muscular. The swing isn't an approach where you would go, oh, it's just a slap hitter. So it's almost odd that power has not become more of his game. So we'll see. I mean, it's also the fact is this is only his third season in the minors. I mean, he did play in Cuba, and that's where they got him from. But in some ways, he's still new to player development, at least on the level that he's getting it now. So there might be a little bit more to unlock, and I think all of your concerns are valid. He's just a guy I've seen a lot, and I have faith in that bat.
And the Indians have done a good job sort of unlocking power with guys who have good contact authority or have good plate discipline. If we look at, Lindor, even though he won an Aflac home run derby when he was in high school, we look at Naquin. These are guys who have added power. We even look at Jose Ramirez, who's really added power, added ISO as he's matured at the major league level. And I think Lindor and Ramirez are very sort of similar in terms of they make tons of contact. They have very good plate discipline. So there is a case to me that, maybe they can sort of tap into that power and that frame with Diaz. I just want to see it a little more. And I'm hoping to. So now we have this grouping, and we'll talk about them sort of cohesively. We have a collection of starting pitching prospects that you and I were all over the board in terms of our takes on them. I'm obviously way too high on Tristan McKenzie. I have him at 4. You have him at 9. I'm not as high as you on Juan Hillman. And Justice Sheffield were about the same. So talk about why you have, just like what your process was for ranking those guys in the order that you did.
Sheffield's the only one who's really has any degree of provenness. He's still pitching well at the level he's at. Maybe not as eye-blowing numbers as they were a year ago, but he's still pitching very well. That's going to give him that kind of separator. Yes, Tristan McKenzie is pitching very well in Mahoning Valley, but I don't care about Mahoning Valley stats, nor do I care about Arizona stats. Those are completely worthless. They bring nothing to the game. You're getting nothing from those numbers. It's one of those things where those numbers can hurt, they can't help. And his walk rate is a bit of a concern for that level. It's not horrible, but it is a little high. And he's still a tall, skinny dude. And I've talked to a few people, and there are people who do have concerns about his ability to add mass, which is the way he's built. If I'm making an upside list, he's probably, a little ahead of Benson. I mean, the upside is there. I'm not going to debate upside, but I think there's still a big risk with him. And that's why I have him lower at 9th on my list. Big upside, big risk. I mean, he's one of those guys who may never see AAA. Juan Hillman, on the other hand, is not as much of an upside. He's a back end lefty. He's a good athlete. But most people you talk to think he's going to make the majors. But this is just a no doubt guy that he's smart. He pitches well. He's got a good pitch mix. Whereas a McKenzie can be a potential all-star pitcher. Hillman's never going to be that. So this is more me weighing risk versus safety with A-ball pitchers. I have one spot difference between them. Hillman's safety versus the risk of McKenzie is why I have them separated. I tend to be more conservative when it comes to prospects lists, just because we see so many. I mean, even if they go to A-ball and excel, I still often have a hard time getting excited because the A and the high A aren't really separator level. It's not so you get to double A. You've seen a lot of guys do really well down there, and then they get to double A, and all of a sudden their walk rate doubles, their strikeout rate gets cut in half. So Sheffield's, at least in high A, is performing. It's giving the bonus for bloodlines, giving the bonus as a left-hander who's doing what he's doing, and the other two are still. I mean, even in spite of talking to people where almost everyone thinks someone's going to be a major league pitcher, there's still such significant risk that they're at the back end for me.
Yeah, I mean, I love Sheffield just in terms of he's really done almost everything you could ask for at every level of the system he's gone through so far. He's someone who's similarly just been young for his level and highly productive, and he has great prospect pedigree. I mean, to me, you marry those three things, and I'm probably low on him. If I had it to do again, I'd probably flip him to 5 or 6 in front of Nolan Jones. Who I sort of was more aggressive with than I expected when I kept reshuffling my list. But I mean, I think Sheffield's a guy who I'm very, very confident in having big league success, just in terms of the success he's had, the arsenal that he has. You know, I love his pitch mix. So I'm a big Sheffield fan. I went all in on McKenzie. I got to sit in on a start. And he was, you know, I fell in love with the arsenal, seeing it in person. You know, as you said, the data doesn't matter really at all from Lake County, but I love seeing guys collecting, you know, spiking K rates at any level, especially when they have elite stuff. Because early it just shows me that they're getting used to knowing how to use it. I think we've seen guys move through this system or enter the system with pretty good arsenals who just really struggle to command it. You know, I think Mitch Brown should be a much better prospect than he is with the tools he has, but he can't command it. He doesn't really know how to pitch, and that's why he's sort of going to disappear. So I fell in love with McKenzie a bit, and I'll totally admit to doing that. It's a not my category move to place McKenzie where I did, but I just love the arsenal. Love the upside to the point that I threw caution to the wind with risk with McKenzie. So we have Clevenger. And we have one really sort of breakout season of Clevenger last year. It's phenomenal. But we also have this other version of Clevenger that's been sort of like 2016 Clevenger. And the strikeout rate gains that he made are all there. But the command gains and the walk rate gains haven't been there. Is that disconcerting to you at all?
You know, when I look at him, yeah, the walk rate. But at the same time, I'd argue is, you know, you look at him and it's not last year's walk rate, but it's still an improvement over what he was before. And, you know, AAA is a different beast. You are facing a lot of guys who spent a few years in the majors. 3.3 isn't awful. I mean, I know I just said McKenzie's is a little concerning, but a 3.3 in AAA to me isn't awful, whereas something over 3 you just worry about in the lower levels, because that's probably going to rise to me as guys go up levels. When I see it in the upper levels, I'm okay, if that makes any sense. So, I mean, the K rate is stayed strong. The walk rate is a little high, but I still believe in him. I mean, the reason I have him number 4 overall is just because he's a no doubt major league pitcher. Back end floor or mid rotation upside. And I feel pretty good about that. I feel like that's a pretty easy comp to lay out and put on him at this point.
Yeah, I think to me he looks a lot like a 4. I don't love his sort of batted ball outcomes right now. I don't think he gets enough ground balls. He gets a lot of fly balls, line drives. And the walk rate hasn't been fantastic. It's been worrisome to me in that it's still a significant improvement, but I also think it kind of like caps a ceiling to me. I think he probably sits between 3.25 and 3.5 per nine at the big league level, which is really useful. But he doesn't really have the sort of batted ball profile to sort of turn into an elite pitcher with that sort of walk rate. So I think he's probably a really good, really good 4, which is awesome. It's a great value deal, and it certainly merits him as a top 5 pitcher, because I think we're both very confident that he's a locked-in big league starter without much worry. Aiken, we don't really need to touch on, I don't think, in terms of, I think everybody knows that this is someone who has explosive upside, but we're really just sort of depending on how does he come back from Tommy John surgery, and pretty complex surgery additional to Tommy John. How does his arm rehabilitate? So I think we're pretty limited in what we can talk about with Aiken. So the final category here, we can talk about Frazier and Zimmer. Which one? This is actually an interesting question to me, because I think if I asked people a year ago, they would have given me, we might have given different answers. Which one has more risk associated with them at this point, Zimmer or Frazier?
I think most would agree it's Zimmer at this point. I remember, and I had Zimmer ahead of Frazier because I was not sure about Frazier's, if his half year was enough for me. But last year people were calling for Zimmer to be promoted to the majors like to start the year, and I would say the biggest problem right now I have with Bradley Zimmer is it's been a year and he was hurt last year and he looks very like I haven't seen much development from him this year. I feel like that is a big concern for me. Is at what point do you get concerned that he's not? I was looking through numbers to find a good comp, but I mean he's a big power, solid defender, low on base, lots of strikeouts. I mean, is he a poor man's Adam Jones? But the lack of development this year, the swing has got holes in it. It's so loopy that I think he is far from the kind of 2 years ago. Everyone's like, oh, he's a safe hitter, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
Yeah, I think the best way I talk myself into Zimmer being an impact big leaguer is if he can sort of stay in center and ride out a solid power profile. But even that, we have this sort of like, I think he was labeled as a, 5 solid average tools, maybe 1 or 2 that play above average. But I think now at this point we're thinking something different. The K rate certainly, over the last 30 days, it's been under 20. It's been at 22% rather than 30%, which it was for most of the year, and that's certainly positive to me. The walk rate's taken a big jump this year, but I really worry. He's very pull heavy. He has a pretty high K rate. The batting average is just going to be punishing, and we'll see what his walk rate can sustain at. But those are 2 really tough things to overcome. You have to fix one of those at the big league level, or it's going to be a struggle, even if you hit for 20 home runs and play center or right. So we can just throw out our final love of Clint Frazier. And if you want to talk about Frazier for a moment, what do you see in terms of 162 game major league season from Frazier, like mid-career, peak season? What do you think a peak Clint Frazier season looks like?
I like Clint, obviously, because I haven't been one player in my system. I don't want to overhype him too much because I think there's a danger in that. I mean, he's not one of the top 20 prospects in baseball for a reason. Like, I think he's a guy who, a typical year is probably going to be 20 to 25 home runs. He'll occasionally have, a peak, maybe a few that get into the 30s. But, he does put the ball on the ground a lot. It feels like in games, it's either like it's a towering shot or it's to the second baseman. But he's going to be a 150 strikeout. He's going to be a top 10 in strikeout guy. He's going to walk at a decent pace. He's going to get on base. I mean, he's going to be a good 4 or 5 type. But anyone who really thinks, I don't see like the MVP ceiling necessarily, but you know, he's going to make, I think there's a good chance for a guy here who's going to make a handful of all-star teams and be a really good hitter. You know, like I said, probably closer to 25 to 30 home runs a year. But I just see some people get on the hyperbolic mountain with people, and it always drives me insane.
Yeah, so I think really interesting to me is how Frazier ages defensively as a right fielder, whether he can play, above average in right field or average. I think to me, he's really interesting as a, 20, 25 homers, 340 OBP, an average defense in right field is just so useful. I mean, that's like a 3 or 4 WAR player. And if he does that for a couple of years, I'll be pretty content, I think. And I'm glad you sort of locked the ceiling a little bit, because I think the ceiling with Frazier at times is really exaggerated in terms of the expectations. I think 20 and solid D and a decent OBP, that's a phenomenal big league player. I mean, that's like what Michael Brantley is. I guess like people don't understand that, but Michael Brantley hits 20 homers. He's like a 350 OBP most of the time. If you do that, maybe a little more power, a little less OBP from Frazier and useful defense, but that's really useful. That's a guy that's tremendous value to a franchise like the Indians, especially if cheap and under contract. So,
but will people be disappointed by that because it's not 40 home runs? I guess that's my concern, and I wonder. Like, I love Lindor, but is what Lindor has done going to make it harder on people where they expect instant MVP candidate? As opposed to, look at Brian Buxton in Minnesota and the struggles, or look at all of the guys in KC and the struggles.
Yeah, I mean,
like I said, I like him. I like him a lot. He's a very good player, but if he's not like Manny Ramirez 1997, are people going to have a fit?
Well, Cleveland fans will have a fit about anything, so it's very likely they'll have a fit. But he's going to be a really solid big leaguer. It's interesting what pedigree does to players. I think Brantley and Kluber and a lot of these guys had really sort of limited pedigrees. So there's really, in terms of prospect hype, I should say. And so their outcomes were fantastic. They overwhelmed, and there's never much criticism. And you have players like Santana, Asdrubal Cabrera before him, and Chu even, who were very valuable pieces, but their sort of pedigree laid these expectations that no Indians fan will ever let them forget. And the expectations were never fair to begin with, which, I always worry about with a guy like Frazier. But so we're pretty much close to a wrap. Is there anybody that we haven't talked about? Because I know I haven't hit everyone. Or is there anything you want to hit on before we close this thing out?
Well, I don't think we mentioned one guy who I said would be my 21 and was on your list. So we should. I think Kaye Tom deserves at least a little love, right?
Yeah, I'm down for giving him love. So Tom to me is a lot like Greg Allen in that he's raking again. Phenomenal walk rate and strikeout rate. Phenomenal offensive tools. Really outstanding. Probably a tick old for his level. I'd like to see him against better competition.
And what I like with Tom is, on top of that, you go back. He played at Kentucky in the SEC. This is me being a draft person that I am. Kentucky, for whatever reason, guys hit their junior year and fall apart there. They've had multiple guys who look like first-round picks as sophomores. Something happens junior year, and they go to craft. Kyle Cody, Zach Brown, Javon Shelby. He never was a big name at Kentucky, but all he did was hit. And why that's important is Kentucky's in the SEC, which is head and shoulders in terms of draft talent, the top conference. This is a guy who stepped onto Kentucky and posted an OPS of 1261 with a 374. Or no, I'm sorry, ignore that. That's his community college. Okay, so his first year at Kentucky, he stepped on and hit it with an 850 OPS and then a 971. Last year Mahoning Valley was the worst year he's had in college or the pros, and he's continued to hit. He needs to get moved up. I mean, there were some injury issues this year, and the ISO is never going to be high. But everyone keeps doubting him. He's small. He doesn't necessarily elicit the scouting oohs and ahs, but in terms of a pure numbers guy, I just love what we've seen going all the way back to college.
Well, that's a good one to wrap up on. I think, he's very under discussed, certainly in the system. And hopefully we're going to see an outfield shuffle soon with Tome and Allen both getting bumped up, and Frazier as well. I think that would serve each of them well.
Agreed.
Moving forward. Thanks for coming aboard, Jeff. Always fun. I'm glad we get to lay out our list with this. And have a good night, everybody.
Agreed. Yeah.